You stand at the edge of your own life, looking back at all the versions of yourself you've left behind. The child who believed anything was possible. The teenager who burned with dreams. The young adult who thought they had time to become everything they imagined. And somewhere along the way, you stopped becoming. You started repeating. Most people aren't living. They're repeating. They wake up to the same thoughts, the same fears, the same ceiling. They speak the same words, think the same patterns, make the same choices, day after day after day. The calendar changes, but nothing else does. They age, but they don't evolve. They survive, but they don't transform. And there's a specific kind of suffocation in that. A quiet panic that arrives at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep. A heaviness that sits on your chest when you realize another month has passed and you are exactly who you were 30 days ago. Another year gone, and you're still trapped in the same story, the same habits, the same small version of yourself. You feel it, don't you? That low hum of discontent, that whisper that says there's more, that you're capable of more, that somewhere inside you is a person you haven't met yet, a self that's bigger, braver, more alive. But you don't know how to reach them. You don't know how to bridge the gap between who you are and who you could become. So you stay where you are, in the familiar, in the safe, in the known, even when the known is painful, even when the familiar is suffocating, because at least you understand this version of yourself. At least you know how to be this person, even if this person isn't enough. But here's the truth they don't tell you. The day you stop becoming is the day you start fading. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, imperceptibly, like color draining from a photograph left too long in the sun. You fade into routines. You fade into comfort. You fade into a life that feels like it's happening to someone else. And the tragedy isn't that you're unhappy. The tragedy is that you've forgotten what it feels like to grow, to stretch, to become. You've forgotten that you were designed for evolution, not stagnation. That your brain, your body, your very existence is built for change, for adaptation, for continuous transformation. Somewhere along the way, you started believing that you were finished, that who you are now is who you'll always be, that your personality is fixed, your patterns are permanent, your story is written. You started believing that growth was something that happened in childhood, in youth, in the early chapters of life. But not now. Not anymore. Not for you. And that belief became a cage. A prison you built yourself, one thought at a time. One excuse at a time. One day of sameness at a time. But what if that belief is wrong? What if you're not finished? What if you're not fixed? What if every single day is an opportunity to become someone new? Not a different person, but a fuller version, a deeper expression, a more aligned iteration of who you're meant to be. What if reinvention isn't a luxury reserved for people in crisis? What if it's not something you do once, after a breakdown or a divorce or a wake-up call? What if reinvention is a daily practice, a sacred commitment, a way of life? That's what this journey is about. Not a one-time transformation, not a dramatic before and after, but a daily decision to prioritize your growth, to make becoming your religion, your rhythm, your reason for waking up. Because here's what happens when you make growth your priority. You stop fading. You stop repeating. You stop living in the ghost of who you used to be, or the shadow of who you think you should be. You start living as someone who is always becoming, always evolving, always reaching for the next level of yourself. And that changes everything. It changes how you wake up in the morning. Instead of dread, there's curiosity. Instead of heaviness, there's possibility. You open your eyes and think, who am I becoming today? What version of myself am I stepping into? What old pattern am I ready to release? What new capacity am I ready to claim? It changes how you move through your day. You're no longer on autopilot. You're present. You're intentional. You're making choices that align with the person you're becoming, not the person you've been. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to practice a new way of speaking. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to practice a new way of responding. Every moment becomes an opportunity to practice being someone new. It changes your relationships, because when you're growing, you attract people who are growing. You stop tolerating connections that keep you small. You stop performing for approval. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You become a mirror for what's possible, and the people around you either rise to meet you or they fall away. And both are okay. Both are part of the process. It changes your relationship with time. You stop feeling like you're running out of it. You stop feeling like you've wasted it. Because every day you're growing is a day well lived. Every day you're becoming is a day that matters. Time stops being something that happens to you and becomes something you're actively shaping, moment by moment, choice by choice. It changes your relationship with yourself. You stop being so harsh, so critical, so disappointed, because you're not comparing yourself to some impossible standard or some imagined version of perfection. You're simply asking, am I growing? Am I evolving? Am I becoming more of who I'm meant to be? And if the answer is yes, even in the smallest way, that's enough. That's everything. This isn't about becoming someone else. It's not about fixing what's broken or proving what's possible. It's about honoring the truth that you are not a finished product. You are a living, breathing, evolving process. You are not here to arrive. You are here to become. And the beautiful thing about becoming is that it doesn't require perfection. It doesn't require a complete overhaul of your life. It doesn't require waiting until you're ready or until conditions are right or until you have more time or more money or more support. It requires one thing, a daily commitment to growth, a daily decision to prioritize your evolution over your comfort, your expansion over your safety, your becoming over your staying. That's the promise of this journey. By the time we reach the end, you will understand that you are not fixed. You are not finished. You are not too late. You will have a system, a practice, a way of being that makes growth inevitable. You will know how to audit your life, anchor into your next level self, and act on that vision every single day. You will know how to navigate resistance, how to sustain momentum, how to grow even when life gets hard. But more than that, you will know yourself differently. You will no longer see yourself as someone who's trying to change. You will see yourself as someone who is changed. Someone who is always changing. Someone who has made peace with the fact that growth is not a destination, but a direction. Not a goal, but a way of life. You will wake up different. You will move through the world different. You will relate to yourself and others different. Not because you've become perfect, but because you've become committed. Committed to the ongoing work of becoming. Committed to the sacred practice of reinvention. Committed to letting your growth be your priority every single day. And here's what that looks like. It looks like someone who's no longer afraid of change. someone who welcomes discomfort as a sign they're expanding, someone who sees every challenge as an invitation to become more capable, more resilient, more alive. It looks like someone who's stopped waiting for permission or the perfect moment or external validation. Someone who's decided that their evolution is their responsibility and their privilege. It looks like freedom. Not the freedom to stay the same, but the freedom to keep becoming. The freedom to outgrow old versions of yourself without guilt. The freedom to try new ways of being without shame. The freedom to live as someone who is never done, never finished, never complete. Because completion would mean death, and you are here to live. So this is your invitation. Not to fix yourself, not to become someone else, but to honor the truth that you are designed for growth. That stagnation is not your natural state. That repetition is not your destiny. That every single day you have the opportunity to become more of who you are meant to be. You are not here to stay the same. You are here to become. And today, right now, in this moment, you get to start. Not tomorrow, not when you're ready, not when conditions are perfect. Now, because becoming doesn't wait for the right time. Becoming is the right time. This is the work. This is the path. This is the promise. You are not fixed. You are not finished. You are not too late. You are exactly where you need to be to begin the most important practice of your life, making your growth your priority, every single day. Let's begin. You know what it feels like, don't you? The weight of the unlived life. It sits on your chest when you wake up. It follows you through your day. It whispers to you in quiet moments. This isn't all you're capable of. This isn't all you're meant to be. But you don't know how to move toward that other life, that other version of yourself. So you stay where you are, carrying the weight of everything you haven't become. There's the executive who climbs the ladder, checks every box, earns every promotion, but feels nothing. They sit in their corner office, looking out at a city they've conquered, and all they feel is empty. They've built the life they thought they wanted, but somewhere in the building, they lost themselves. They can't remember the last time they felt excited about their work, the last time they created something that mattered to them, not just to the shareholders. They're successful, but they're not fulfilled. And the gap between those two things is eating them alive. There's the parent who gives everything to everyone else, who wakes up early to pack lunches and stays up late to check homework, who chauffeurs and coaches and organizes and nurtures, who has built an entire identity around being needed. But when they look in the mirror, they don't recognize themselves anymore. They don't know who they are outside of their role. They don't know what they want, what they dream about, what makes them feel alive. They've poured so much of themselves into others that there's nothing left for them. And they're terrified to admit it, because admitting it feels like failing, like being ungrateful, like being selfish. There's the dreamer who has notebooks full of ideas, vision boards on their walls, plans they've revised 100 times. They know exactly what they want to do, who they want to become. They can see it so clearly in their mind. But they never move. They research and prepare and wait for the right time, the right resources, the right level of readiness, and the right time never comes. So they stay in jobs that drain them, relationships that diminish them, routines that numb them. And every year that passes, the gap between their dreams and their reality grows wider, until they start to wonder if they ever really wanted those things at all, or if dreaming was just a way to distract themselves from the fact that they're too afraid to actually live. This is what stagnation looks like. Not always dramatic, not always obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's comfortable. Sometimes it looks like success from the outside, but inside it feels like dying. Slowly, imperceptibly, one repeated day at a time. You feel it at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep, when your mind starts running through the inventory of your life and comes up short, when you think about all the things you said you'd do by now, all the versions of yourself you promised you'd become, and you're not there, you're not even close, and you don't know how to bridge that gap. You don't know how to become the person you see in your mind, so you lie there in the dark, carrying the weight of everything you haven't done, everything you haven't become. You feel it when you watch others evolve. When someone you know makes a bold move, changes careers, starts a business, moves to a new city, transforms their body, ends a relationship that wasn't serving them. And instead of feeling inspired, you feel something else, something you're ashamed to name. Envy. Not because you want what they have, but because you want what they did. The courage to change, the willingness to risk, the belief that growth is possible. And you don't have that. Or you had it once, but you lost it somewhere along the way. You feel it in your relationships, the distance that opens between you and your partner when you're both stuck in your patterns, when you've stopped challenging each other, stopped growing together, stopped being curious about who the other person is becoming, because neither of you is becoming anything. You're just existing side by side, going through the motions, having the same conversations, avoiding the same conflicts, living the same day over and over with different dates on the calendar. And your children watch. They absorb everything. They see you playing it safe, staying small, choosing comfort over growth. And they learn that this is what adulthood looks like, that dreams are for children and responsibility means giving up on yourself, that growing up means stopping growth. And you don't want them to learn that. You don't want them to inherit your fear of change, your resistance to risk, your belief that you are who you are, and that's all you'll ever be. But you're teaching them anyway. Not with your words, but with your life. You feel it in friendships that fade, not because of conflict or betrayal, but because you've become predictable. Because you're no longer interesting to yourself, so you're no longer interesting to others. Because growth creates connection, and stagnation creates distance. Because people who are evolving need other people who are evolving. And when you stop growing, the people around you either stop growing with you, or they move on. And both hurt. Both feel like loss. You feel it in your body, the tension you carry in your shoulders, the exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix, the restlessness that keeps you scrolling through your phone at night, looking for something to fill the void but never finding it. Your body knows you're not living the life you're meant to live. Your body knows you're capable of more, and it's trying to tell you, through discomfort, through illness, through the low-grade anxiety that's become so constant you think it's just part of who you are. But it's not. It's your system's way of saying, something needs to change. Something needs to shift. You are not meant to live like this. There's a specific shame that comes with knowing you're capable of more, but not knowing how to access it. It's different from the shame of failure. Failure at least means you tried. This is the shame of not trying, of having potential you're not using, gifts you're not sharing, a life you're not living. And the longer you stay stuck, the heavier that shame becomes, until you start to believe that maybe you're not actually capable of more. Maybe you were wrong about yourself. Maybe this is all there is. And that belief is the most dangerous part. Because once you believe you can't change, you stop trying. Once you believe you're fixed, you become fixed. Once you believe your story is written, you stop writing new chapters. And the unlived life becomes the only life. The potential becomes theoretical. The dreams become fantasies you used to have before you knew better. But here's what you need to understand. That belief is a lie. The belief that you can't change, that you're too old, too stuck, too far gone. It's a lie your fear tells you to keep you safe, to keep you in the familiar, to protect you from the discomfort of growth. But safety is not the same as living. Comfort is not the same as fulfillment. And staying the same is not the same as being okay. You are carrying the weight of an unlived life because somewhere along the way you stopped prioritizing your growth. You stopped making your evolution a daily practice. You let life happen to you instead of shaping it with intention. You got busy, got comfortable, got scared, and you told yourself that this was enough, that wanting more was greedy, that changing was risky, that staying the same was responsible. But it's not responsible. It's suffocating, and you know it. You feel it every day, in the gap between who you are and who you could be, in the distance between your current life and the life you imagine when you're honest with yourself, in the weight that sits on your chest and whispers, "There's more. There has to be more." And there is. But you have to be willing to do the work. You have to be willing to prioritize your growth over your comfort, your evolution over your safety, your becoming over your staying. You have to be willing to look at the patterns that keep you stuck and choose something different. You have to be willing to feel uncomfortable, awkward, uncertain. You have to be willing to outgrow old versions of yourself, even when those versions feel safe. Because the alternative is this: carrying the weight of the unlived life until it crushes you, until you wake up at 60, 70, 80, and realize you spent your entire life being the same person, never evolving, never expanding, never becoming more of who you were meant to be. And by then, it feels too late. By then, thy dark regret is unbearable. But it's not too late. Now, right now, in this moment, you have a choice. You can keep carrying the weight. You can keep repeating the same patterns, living the same day, being the same person. Or you can decide that today is the day you start becoming. Not tomorrow. Not when you're ready. Not when conditions are perfect. Today. Because the weight of the unlived life doesn't get lighter with time. It gets heavier. And the gap between who you are and who you could be doesn't close on its own. It widens, unless you make a different choice, unless you decide that your growth matters, that your evolution is worth prioritizing, that becoming is not a luxury, but a necessity. This is your invitation to stop carrying the weight and start living the life, to stop being haunted by your unlived potential and start actualizing it, to stop watching others evolve and start evolving yourself, to stop teaching your children to stay small and start showing them what growth looks like, to stop fading into patterns and start becoming someone new. The weight is real, the struggle is real, the pain of stagnation is real, but so is the possibility of transformation. So is your capacity for change. So is the life that's waiting for you on the other side of your willingness to grow. You feel the weight because you're meant for more. You carry the burden because you have unlived potential. You suffer because you're not honoring the truth of who you could become. And that suffering is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that something is calling you forward. Something is inviting you to become. And it's time to answer. So why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we choose the familiar over the possible? Why do we stay stuck when we know we're capable of more? The answer isn't simple, and it's not your fault. Your resistance to growth isn't a character flaw. It's not laziness or weakness or lack of ambition. It's biology, history, and human nature colliding in ways you've never fully understood. Until now. Let's start with your brain. Your beautiful, ancient, survival-oriented brain. It was designed over millions of years to do one thing above all else: keep you alive. Not happy, not fulfilled, not actualized. Alive. And for most of human history, staying alive meant staying safe. It meant avoiding risk, minimizing uncertainty, sticking with the known. Because the unknown could kill you. Your ancestors who wandered into unfamiliar territory often didn't come back. Your ancestors who tried new things, who took risks, who ventured beyond the safety of the tribe. Many of them died. And the ones who survived, the ones who passed their genes down to you, were the careful ones, the cautious ones, the ones who prioritized safety over exploration, certainty over possibility, the familiar over the new. So your brain inherited that wisdom, that bias toward the known, and it's wired into your neural architecture at the deepest level. Your amygdala, the ancient alarm system in your brain, is constantly scanning for threats. And you know what registers as a threat? Change, uncertainty, the unfamiliar. Anything that disrupts your patterns, challenges your identity, or asks you to step into the unknown. When you think about growing, about becoming someone new, your amygdala starts firing. It sounds the alarm. It floods your system with stress hormones. It creates that feeling of resistance, that wall you hit every time you try to change. And it's not because growth is actually dangerous. It's because your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and psychological discomfort. To your amygdala, stepping into a new version of yourself feels the same as stepping off a cliff. And here's the thing, your brain doesn't care about your potential. It doesn't care about your dreams or your purpose or the person you could become. It cares about keeping you safe. And safe means familiar. Safe means predictable. Safe means staying exactly who you are, doing exactly what you've always done, even when who you are and what you've done is killing you slowly. This is why change feels so hard. Why growth requires so much effort. Why every time you try to break a pattern or form a new habit or step into a new identity, you feel that pull back toward the old. That's not weakness. That's your survival system doing exactly what it was designed to do, protecting you from the perceived threat of the unknown. But there's more, because it's not just your brain's fear of the unknown that keeps you stuck. It's your attachment to the known. Even when the known is painful, even when the known is limiting, even when the known is slowly suffocating the life out of you, you have an identity, a story about who you are. And that story was built over years, decades, maybe your entire life. It was built from your experiences, your relationships, your successes and failures, your wounds and your triumphs. And at some point, that story solidified. It became the truth. Not a truth, the truth. This is who I am. This is what I'm capable of. This is how the world works. This is my place in it. And once that story solidifies, you become attached to it. Because it's familiar. Because it's comfortable. Because even if it limits you, at least you know how to be this person. You know how this story goes. You know what to expect. And there's a strange comfort in that, a relief in knowing. Even when knowing means accepting less than you deserve. Think about it. How many times have you said things like, "I'm just not a morning person. I'm not good with money. I'm not creative. I'm not the type of person who takes risks. I've always been this way." These statements feel like facts, like descriptions of reality. But they're not. They're stories. Stories you've told yourself so many times that you started to believe them. Stories that became your identity. Stories that created invisible cages you now live inside, and the cage feels safe. Because you know its dimensions, you know its limits, you know how to move within it without bumping into the bars. But it's still a cage, and you built it yourself, one limiting belief at a time, one "I'm just not" at a time, one "I've always been" at a time. But where did those stories come from? Why did you decide you were this kind of person and not that kind of person? The answer goes back further than you think. Back to childhood. Back to the messages you received about who you should be, what you should want, how you should behave. Maybe you were told to be responsible, so you learned that dreaming was irresponsible. Maybe you were told to be nice, so you learned that setting boundaries was mean. Maybe you were told to be successful, so you learned that rest was failure. Maybe you were told to be grateful, so you learned that wanting more was greedy. Maybe you were told to be realistic, so you learned that believing in yourself was delusional. These messages didn't come with malice. They came from parents who wanted to protect you, teachers who wanted to prepare you, a culture that wanted to socialize you. But they shaped you nonetheless. They taught you what was acceptable and what wasn't, what was safe and what was risky, who you should be and who you shouldn't try to become. And you internalized those messages. You made them part of your identity. You built your life around them. And now, decades later, you're still living inside the cage those messages created, still playing by rules you didn't write, still limiting yourself based on beliefs you never questioned, still being the person you were told to be instead of the person you could become. This is the invisible inheritance, the conditioning you didn't ask for but carry anyway, the stories that were planted in you so early, so deeply, that you think they're yours, that you think they're true, that you think they're unchangeable, but they're not. They never were. They're just stories, and stories can be rewritten. There's another piece to this, another reason you choose the familiar over the possible. It's the fear of loss, because changing, growing, becoming someone new, it means losing something. Losing the old version of yourself, losing the identity you've known, losing the relationships built around that identity, losing the comfort of certainty, even when that certainty is painful. And loss is terrifying, even when what you're losing is limiting you, even when what you're losing is keeping you small, because at least it's yours, at least it's known, at least you understand it. So you stay, not because you want to, but because the fear of losing what you know is greater than the desire to gain what you could have. Because the devil you know feels safer than the angel you don't. Because your brain would rather keep you in familiar pain than risk unfamiliar possibility. This is the root of your resistance. This is why you stay stuck even when you know better. This is why you choose the same patterns, the same thoughts, the same version of yourself, day after day after day. Not because you're weak, not because you're broken, not because you lack willpower or discipline or desire, but because your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect you from threat, and growth, to your ancient survival system, registers as threat. Because your identity has become so solidified that you can't imagine being anyone else. Because you're still living inside stories that were written for you decades ago. Because the fear of losing what you know is stronger than the hope of gaining what you could become. And here's the most important part. None of this is your fault. You didn't choose your biology. You didn't choose your conditioning. You didn't choose the way your brain is wired, or the stories you inherited, or the fear that keeps you small. All of this was given to you. All of this is part of being human. But understanding this changes everything. Because once you understand that your resistance isn't personal, it becomes workable. Once you understand that your fear is biological, you can work with it instead of being ruled by it. Once you understand that your identity is constructed, you can deconstruct it. Once you understand that your stories are inherited, you can choose new ones. This is the first key to freedom. Understanding. Understanding that you're not stuck because something is wrong with you. You're stuck because you're human. Because you have a brain that prioritizes safety over growth. Because you have an identity that feels more real than it actually is. Because you have conditioning you never questioned. Because you have fears that make perfect evolutionary sense even when they don't serve your current life. And once you have understanding, you have choice. Once you see the mechanisms that keep you stuck, you can start to work with them. You can learn to soothe your amygdala while still moving forward. You can learn to question your identity while still honoring who you've been. You can learn to examine your conditioning while still having compassion for how you got here. You can learn to acknowledge your fear while still choosing growth. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not failing. You are simply human. And humans are wired for safety first, growth second. But you are also wired for adaptation, for learning, for change. You have neuroplasticity, the ability to rewire your brain throughout your entire life. You have consciousness, the ability to observe your patterns and choose differently. You have agency, the power to act in ways that align with who you want to become, not just who you've been. The familiar feels safe, but it's not your destiny. The possible feels scary, but it's not actually dangerous. And the gap between who you are and who you could become is not a judgment. It's an invitation to understand yourself more deeply, to work with your biology instead of against it, to rewrite your stories, to question your conditioning, to choose growth, even when every ancient part of you is screaming to stay the same. This is where transformation begins, not in willpower, not in forcing, but in understanding, in compassion, in seeing yourself clearly and choosing differently anyway. Now that you understand why you've been stuck, you need a map, a framework that shows you where you are, where you're going, and what the journey looks like. Because transformation isn't random. It's not chaotic. It follows a pattern, a progression, and when you can see the stages clearly, you can navigate them with intention instead of stumbling through them in the dark. There are 5 stages of reinvention, 5 levels of mastery that everyone moves through on the path from stagnation to embodied growth. You've been in some of these stages before, even if you didn't recognize them. And right now, you're in one of them. The question is, which one? And more importantly, what does it take to move to the next? Let's start at the beginning. Stage 1 is unconscious stagnation. This is where most people live most of their lives. And the defining feature of this stage is that you don't even know you're stuck. You're on autopilot. You wake up, go through your routines, do what you've always done, think what you've always thought. And it feels normal. It feels like life. You're not questioning it because you don't realize there's anything to question. In this stage, you might feel vaguely unsatisfied. There might be a low hum of discontent running beneath the surface of your days, but you attribute it to external circumstances, to your job, your relationship, your city, your luck. You think, if I just had this promotion, this partner, this house, this opportunity, then I'd feel different. Then I'd be happy. Then I'd be fulfilled. But the dissatisfaction isn't about what you have. It's about who you're being, or more accurately, who you're not becoming. You're repeating the same patterns, living the same day over and over, being the same person year after year. And some part of you knows this, but that knowing hasn't reached your conscious awareness yet. You're asleep in your own life, dreaming that you're awake. The emotional marker of this stage is numbness. Not depression, necessarily. Just a flatness, a lack of vitality. You're going through the motions. You're surviving, but you're not alive. And you don't realize how numb you are until you move to the next stage. Stage 2 is awakening. This is the moment everything changes, the moment you realize you've been asleep. And awakening doesn't always come gently. Sometimes it comes through crisis, a loss, a failure, a moment of clarity that cracks you open. Sometimes it comes through observation. You see someone else living differently, and something inside you recognizes, that's possible. That's what I've been missing. That's what I want. Sometimes it comes through accumulation. Years of that low hum of discontent finally reaching a volume you can no longer ignore. Years of living the same day until one morning you wake up and think, I can't do this anymore. I can't be this person anymore. I can't live this life anymore. Something has to change. In this stage, you become aware of the gap, the distance between who you are and who you could be, between the life you're living and the life you're capable of living. And that awareness is painful. It's disorienting. Because suddenly you can see the cage you've been living in. You can see the patterns you've been repeating. You can see all the ways you've been limiting yourself, playing small, choosing safety over growth. And you can't unsee it. That's the thing about awakening. Once you wake up, you can't go back to sleep. You can try. You can distract yourself, numb yourself, tell yourself it doesn't matter. But the knowing is there now. Permanent, unavoidable. You know you're capable of more. You know you've been settling. You know something needs to change. The emotional marker of this stage is restlessness, an urgent, almost frantic energy that says, now, not tomorrow, not someday, now. You feel alive in a way you haven't felt in years, but you also feel overwhelmed because you don't know where to start. You don't know how to bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be. You just know you can't stay where you are anymore. This is where most people get stuck, in the space between awakening and action. They see the need for change, but don't take the step. They feel the call, but don't answer. They recognize the gap, but don't move toward it. And the longer they stay in this space, the more the awakening starts to fade. The more they start to doubt what they saw. The more they start to convince themselves that maybe they were wrong. maybe they're fine where they are. Maybe wanting more is unrealistic. Maybe they should just accept their life as it is. But if you move forward, if you take the step, you enter stage 3, active disruption. And this is the hardest stage, the most uncomfortable, the most uncertain. Because this is where you actually start breaking your patterns. This is where you try new behaviors, make different choices, step into a new version of yourself. And it feels awful. You feel awkward, clumsy, like you're wearing someone else's clothes, like you're performing instead of being. You try to speak up in meetings and your voice shakes. You try to set boundaries and feel guilty. You try to create something and it feels forced. You try to be confident and feel like an imposter. Everything that used to be automatic now requires effort. Everything that used to be comfortable now feels strange, and your brain is screaming at you to stop. Your amygdala is in full alarm mode. Your old identity is fighting for survival. Your conditioning is pulling you back toward the familiar. Every cell in your body is saying, "This is wrong. This isn't you. Go back to who you were. Go back to what you know. Go back to safety." But you don't. You keep going. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when you fail. Even when you look foolish. Even when every instinct says to quit. Because you remember what you saw in the awakening. You remember the gap. You remember the knowing that you're capable of more. And you're committed to becoming that person, even if it means feeling like a stranger to yourself for a while. The emotional marker of this stage is discomfort mixed with determination. You're not sure you can do this, but you're not willing to give up. You're scared, but you're showing up anyway. You're awkward, but you're trying. And slowly, incrementally, things start to shift. You have a conversation where you set a boundary and the other person respects it. You create something and it's actually good. You try a new behavior and it works. You step into a new version of yourself and for a moment, just a moment, it feels natural. And those moments become breadcrumbs, evidence that change is possible, that growth is happening, that you're not pretending to be someone new. You're becoming someone new. And if you keep going, if you keep showing up, if you keep choosing the new over the familiar even when it's hard, you move into stage 4, integration. This is where the magic happens. This is where the new behaviors stop feeling like behaviors and start feeling like who you are, where the effort decreases and the flow increases, where growth stops being something you're doing and starts being something you're living. In this stage, the awkwardness fades. The new version of yourself starts to feel like yourself. You speak up in meetings and your voice is steady. You set boundaries and feel clear. You create and it flows. You show up as the person you've been becoming, and it doesn't feel like trying anymore. It feels like expressing, like being, like coming home to a version of yourself you always knew was there, but couldn't access until now. The new habits are automatic. The new mindsets are natural. The new identity is integrated. You're no longer trying to be someone new. You are someone new. And the person you were before starts to feel distant, like a costume you used to wear, like a character you used to play. You can remember them, but you're not them anymore. You've outgrown that version of yourself. You've evolved. The emotional marker of this stage is ease. Not that everything is easy, but that growth itself feels easier. You're no longer fighting yourself. You're no longer resisting your own evolution. You're aligned. You're flowing. You're living as the person you worked so hard to become. And it feels good. Really good. So good that you wonder how you ever lived any other way. But here's what most people don't realize. Integration is not the end. It's not the destination. Because once you've tasted this level of growth, once you've experienced what it feels like to evolve, to transform, to become more of who you're meant to be, you don't want to stop. You can't stop. Because you've discovered something profound. Growth itself is the point. Becoming itself is the reward. And there's always another level, another version, another iteration of yourself waiting to be born. This is stage 5, embodied evolution. This is mastery. Not the mastery of a skill or a habit, but the mastery of growth itself. This is where you become someone who doesn't just grow once, but makes growth a perpetual state, a lifestyle, an identity. You are no longer someone who's trying to change. You are someone who is always changing. Someone who sees change as natural, as inevitable, as desirable. In this stage, you're not attached to any particular version of yourself. You're not clinging to who you've become, because you know you'll outgrow it eventually. You're not afraid of losing yourself because you understand that losing old versions is how you find new ones. You're comfortable with discomfort. You're at ease with uncertainty. You're excited by the unknown because you trust your capacity to adapt, to learn, to evolve. You make growth your daily practice. You audit your life regularly, asking, what's no longer serving me? What version of myself am I ready to release? What's calling me forward? You anchor into new identities before they feel comfortable. You act on growth before you feel ready. And you do this not because you have to, but because this is who you are now. This is your way of being. The emotional marker of this stage is aliveness. A deep, sustained vitality that comes from living in constant becoming. You're never bored because you're always learning. You're never stuck because you're always evolving. You're never finished because you understand that being finished would mean being dead, and you're here to live. So where are you right now? Can you locate yourself on this map? Are you in unconscious stagnation, going through the motions without realizing there's another way? Are you in awakening, seeing the gap and feeling the call? Are you in active disruption, doing the hard work of breaking patterns and building new ones? Are you in integration, watching your new identity solidify? Or are you in embodied evolution, living as someone who makes growth their way of life? Wherever you are, it's exactly where you need to be. Because the path forward is clear, the stages are mapped, and now you know what it takes to move from one to the next. Not perfection, not massive leaps, just consistent, intentional movement. One choice at a time, one day at a time, one stage at a time, until growth is no longer something you're trying to achieve. It's something you are. So now you need a method, a system, a daily practice that turns understanding into action and action into transformation. Because knowing the stages isn't enough, seeing the map isn't enough. You need a way to move through them. A process so simple you can do it every day. So powerful it changes everything. This is the daily reinvention practice. 3 steps, 3 questions, 3 actions. That's it. But done consistently, done with intention, done before the day's momentum pulls you back into old patterns. This practice will reshape your life. Not someday, not eventually. Starting today, the first step is audit. Every morning, before you do anything else, before you check your phone or make your coffee or dive into the demands of the day, you pause. You sit with yourself, and you ask one question: who am I becoming today? Not who were you yesterday, not who you've always been. Who are you becoming? Right now, in this moment, with the choices you're about to make. Because every day is a vote for the person you're becoming. Every choice is casting that vote. And most people never ask the question. They just wake up and repeat. Wake up and react. Wake up and become the same person they were yesterday, without ever deciding to. But you're different now. You're awake. You're aware. You're committed to growth. So you ask the question, and you listen for the answer, not from your head, but from somewhere deeper, from the part of you that knows what you're capable of, the part that sees the gap between who you are and who you could be, the part that's ready to close that gap one day at a time. And as you sit with that question, you identify one thing, one belief, one habit, one behavior that no longer serves your evolution. Not everything, not your entire list of flaws and limitations. Just one thing, the thing that's most present for you today, the thing that's keeping you small right now. Maybe it's the belief that you're not capable of leading. Maybe it's the habit of scrolling through your phone first thing in the morning. Maybe it's the behavior of apologizing for taking up space. Maybe it's the pattern of saying yes when you mean no. Maybe it's the story that you're too old, too inexperienced, too damaged to change. You name it. You see it clearly. You acknowledge that this belief, this habit, this behavior, it served you once. It protected you. It kept you safe. But it's not serving you anymore. It's keeping you stuck. It's voting for the old version of you. And today, you're choosing differently. This is the audit. Not a judgment. Not a criticism. Just a clear, honest assessment of what's no longer aligned with who you're becoming. And the beauty of this step is that awareness itself creates change. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Once you name the belief, it loses some of its power. Once you acknowledge what's keeping you small, you've already taken the first step toward becoming bigger. The entrepreneur sits at her desk every morning and audits her scarcity mindset. She notices the thought, there's not enough. Not enough clients, not enough money, not enough opportunity. She sees how that thought shapes her decisions, makes her desperate, keeps her playing small, and she names it. Today, I'm auditing the belief that there's not enough. Today, I'm seeing how that belief is keeping me stuck. The teacher stands in his car before walking into the school and audits his impatience. He notices how quick he is to react, how short his fuse has become, how his frustration is creating distance between him and his students, and he names it. Today, I'm auditing my impatience. Today, I'm seeing how it's keeping me from being the teacher I want to be. The artist wakes up and audits her fear of visibility. She notices how she creates in private but never shares, how she's been hiding her work for years, how the fear of judgment is keeping her gifts locked away, and she names it. Today, I'm auditing my fear of being seen. Today, I'm recognizing how it's preventing me from becoming who I'm meant to be. This is the work. This is the first step, and it takes maybe 2 minutes, maybe 5. But those minutes set the tone for your entire day. They remind you that you're not on autopilot anymore. You're awake. You're choosing. You're becoming. The second step is anchor. Once you've audited what's keeping you small, you choose what will make you bigger. You select one micro-commitment that represents your next-level self. Not a massive overhaul, not a complete transformation. Just one small, symbolic action that embodies the person you're becoming. This is crucial. The action has to be small enough that you can actually do it. Big goals are inspiring, but they're also overwhelming. And when you're overwhelmed, you don't act. You freeze, you procrastinate. You tell yourself you'll start tomorrow when you have more time, more energy, more clarity. But tomorrow never comes. Tomorrow is just today repeated. So you choose something small, something you can do before noon, something that requires no special resources, no perfect conditions, no external permission, something that's entirely within your control, something that when you do it proves to yourself that you're serious, that you're committed, that you're becoming someone new. Maybe it's reading for 15 minutes, not a whole book, not even a chapter, just 15 minutes, because the person you're becoming is someone who prioritizes learning, who feeds their mind, who chooses growth over distraction. Maybe it's speaking up in one meeting. Not every meeting. Not perfectly. Just once. Because the person you're becoming is someone who uses their voice, who contributes their perspective, who takes up space without apologizing. Maybe it's moving your body with intention, not a full workout, not an hour at the gym, just 10 minutes of movement. Because the person you're becoming honors their body, treats it as a partner in their evolution, moves with purpose instead of just existing. Maybe it's writing 3 sentences, not a full article, not a masterpiece, just 3 sentences. Because the person you're becoming is a creator, someone who shows up for their craft, someone who produces instead of just consumes. The action itself matters less than what it represents. It's not about the 15 minutes of reading, or the 10 minutes of movement, or the 3 sentences of writing. It's about the identity those actions reinforce. It's about voting for the person you're becoming. It's about proving to yourself, in the smallest possible way, that change is happening. That you're not just thinking about growth, you're living it. The entrepreneur anchors into abundance. After auditing her scarcity mindset, she commits to one action that embodies abundance thinking. Today, she'll send a generous email to another business owner, offering help without expecting anything in return. It's small, it's simple, but it's the opposite of scarcity. It's training herself to believe there's enough, that giving doesn't deplete her, that abundance is her natural state. The teacher anchors into patience. After auditing his impatience, he commits to taking 3 deep breaths before responding to the first student who frustrates him. 3 breaths. That's it. But in those breaths, he's practicing the patience he wants to embody. He's creating space between stimulus and response. He's becoming the teacher he wants to be, one breath at a time. The artist anchors into visibility. After auditing her fear, she commits to posting 1 piece of her work online. Not her best work, not even finished work, just one thing, because the person she's becoming doesn't hide. The person she's becoming shares. And sharing once is how you become someone who shares. This is the anchor. This is the commitment. And it needs to be specific. It needs to be small. It needs to be doable before noon. Because the momentum of the day is coming. The demands are coming. The old patterns are coming. And if you wait, if you tell yourself you'll do it later, you won't. Later becomes tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes never, and you stay stuck. But if you do it before noon, before the day takes over, before the momentum pulls you back, you've won. You've voted for your evolution. You've anchored into your next level self. And that action, that small, symbolic commitment, changes everything. Not because it's big, but because it's done. The 3rd step is act. This seems obvious, but it's where most people fail. They audit, they anchor, they set the intention, make the commitment, choose the action, and then they don't do it. They get busy, they get distracted, they get pulled back into old patterns. And by the end of the day, the commitment is forgotten, the anchor is lost, the audit was pointless. So you act, you execute the commitment before noon, you protect it like it's the most important thing you'll do today. Because, in a way, it is. Everything else on your to-do list is about maintaining your current life. This action is about creating your next life. Everything else is about being who you've been. This action is about becoming who you're meant to be. You don't wait until you feel ready. You don't wait until you have time. You don't wait until conditions are perfect. You act before noon, before the resistance builds, before the excuses accumulate, before the old version of you talks you out of it. And here's what happens. When you act, when you follow through, when you do the thing you said you'd do, you build trust with yourself. You prove that your word means something. You demonstrate that you're serious about your growth. And that trust, that proof, that demonstration, it compounds, day after day, action after action, until you become someone who doesn't just say they want to change, you become someone who changes. The method is designed to be flexible. Some days your audit will reveal different patterns. Some days your anchor will be different actions. Some days you'll feel resistance, and it will be hard. Some days you'll feel flow, and it will be easy. But every day you do it. Every day you show up. Every day you vote for the person you are becoming. And it's cumulative. Each day builds on the last. Each action reinforces the new identity. Each commitment proves you're capable of more. Until one day you look back and realize you're not the same person you were a month ago, 3 months ago, a year ago. You've evolved, you've grown, you've become. This is the daily reinvention practice. Audit, anchor, act. 3 steps, 3 questions, 3 actions. Simple enough to do every day. Powerful enough to change your life. Not because it's complicated, but because it's consistent, because it's intentional, because it's cumulative. You're not trying to become someone new all at once. You're becoming someone new one day at a time, one audit at a time, one anchor at a time, one action at a time. And that's how transformation actually works. Not in dramatic moments, but in daily choices. Not in big leaps, but in small steps. Not in someday, but in today. Who are you becoming today? What's one thing keeping you small? What's one action that represents your next level self? And will you do it before noon? Those questions are your path forward. Answer them every day and watch what happens. Once you've established the daily practice, once Audit Anchor Act becomes part of your rhythm, you're ready to go deeper, to add layers, to accelerate and sustain your growth with tools that reinforce the foundation you're building. These aren't replacements for the core method. They're amplifiers, enhancements, ways to make the work more powerful, more personalized, more permanent. Not every tool will resonate with you. Not every practice will fit your life. And that's okay. This is a menu, not a mandate. Take what serves you. Leave what doesn't. Customize your journey. Because growth isn't one size fits all. It's deeply personal. And the practices that transform you might be different from the practices that transform someone else. Let's start with weekly reflection. The daily practice keeps you moving forward. But weekly reflection gives you perspective. It lets you zoom out and see the bigger picture. to identify patterns you can't see when you're in the middle of the work, to celebrate progress that feels invisible day to day, to recalibrate when you've drifted off course. Every week, set aside 30 minutes, not an hour, not a whole afternoon, just 30 minutes. Find a quiet space, grab a journal or open a document, and ask yourself 3 questions. First, what did I learn about myself this week? Not what you accomplished, not what you checked off your list, but what you discovered. What patterns emerged? What beliefs surfaced? What resistance showed up? What surprised you? What challenged you? What revealed something about who you're becoming? Second, what am I celebrating? This is crucial, because growth is hard work, and if you don't pause to acknowledge progress, you'll burn out. You'll start to feel like nothing you do is enough, like you're always chasing and never arriving. So you celebrate. Not just the big wins, but the small ones. The day you followed through when you didn't want to. The moment you chose differently. The conversation where you showed up as your next level self. The tiny evidence that you're changing. Third, what needs to shift? Where did you struggle? Where did you fall back into old patterns? Where did the audit reveal something you're not ready to face? Where did the anchor feel impossible? Where did you skip the action? Not to judge yourself, not to shame yourself, but to see clearly, to adjust, to recalibrate, to bring more awareness to what's blocking your growth so you can work with it instead of being sabotaged by it. These 3 questions give you the data you need to keep evolving. They help you see what's working and what's not, what's moving you forward and what's holding you back, and they remind you that you're making progress, even when it doesn't feel like it, even when the daily work feels incremental. The weekly reflection shows you you're not who you were 7 days ago. You're different, you're growing, you're becoming. Now let's talk about resistance, because it's coming. If it hasn't already, the old version of you is going to fight back. Your conditioning is going to reassert itself. Your brain is going to sound every alarm it has to pull you back to the familiar. And if you don't have tools to work with resistance, it will stop you. It will convince you that growth isn't worth it, that change is too hard, that you should just stay where you are. So you need to recognize sabotage when it shows up, and it shows up in specific ways. Sometimes it's procrastination. You suddenly have 100 urgent tasks that need to be done before you can do your daily practice. Sometimes it's perfectionism. You decide that if you can't do it perfectly, you won't do it at all. Sometimes it's rationalization. You tell yourself that one day off won't matter, that you'll get back to it tomorrow, that you deserve a break. Sometimes it's physical. You get sick. You feel exhausted. Your body shuts down because your nervous system is overwhelmed by the change, and it's trying to force you back to homeostasis, back to what it knows, back to safety. When you recognize resistance, you don't fight it. You don't shame yourself for feeling it. You acknowledge it. You say, "This is resistance. This is my old self trying to protect me. This is my brain doing exactly what it's designed to do, and I'm going to move forward anyway." Then you soothe your nervous system, because you can't override your biology with willpower alone. You need to work with it. You take 3 deep breaths. You place your hand on your heart. You remind yourself, "I'm safe. This discomfort isn't danger. This is just growth. And growth feels uncomfortable, but it's not a threat." You make the action smaller. If your anchor feels impossible today, you scale it down. If you committed to 15 minutes of reading, but you can't do 15, you do 5. You do 3. you do one. Because the point isn't the amount. The point is the consistency. The point is proving to yourself that you show up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. And then you move forward anyway. Not because you feel ready, not because the resistance is gone, but because you've decided that your growth matters more than your comfort, that your evolution is worth the discomfort, that becoming who you're meant to be is worth feeling awkward, uncertain, and afraid. Another powerful tool is identity mantras. These are short, declarative statements that rewire your self-concept, that speak directly to who you're becoming, that override the old stories and replace them with new truths. And when you repeat them consistently, they change the way you see yourself. They change the way you move through the world. They change who you are. The key is to make them present tense. Not, I will become someone who grows, but I am someone who evolves. Not, I want to prioritize my becoming, but I prioritize my becoming. Not, I hope to be brave, but I am brave. Because your brain doesn't distinguish between what's true now and what you're telling it is true. And when you speak your new identity as if it's already real, your brain starts to believe it. And when your brain believes it, you start to live it. Choose 3 to 5 mantras that resonate with the person you're becoming. Write them down. Say them out loud every morning after your audit. Say them before you execute your anchor. Say them when resistance shows up. Say them until they stop feeling like affirmations and start feeling like facts. Until they're not something you're trying to believe, but something you know. I am someone who evolves. I prioritize my becoming. I choose growth over comfort. I trust my capacity to change. I am always becoming more of who I'm meant to be. These statements become your new operating system, your new default, your new truth. And over time, they replace the old stories that kept you small. Now let's talk about growth partnerships. Because you can't do this alone. You're not meant to do this alone. You need people who see your potential, who expect your evolution, who call you higher, who won't let you settle, who won't let you play small, who won't accept your excuses or your rationalizations or your old stories about why you can't change. This isn't about finding cheerleaders. It's not about surrounding yourself with people who tell you you're amazing just as you are. You need people who love you enough to challenge you, who believe in you enough to push you, who are doing their own work and expect you to do yours. Find one person, just one. Someone who's committed to their own growth. Someone who understands the journey. Someone who won't judge you for struggling, but also won't let you give up. And create a structure. A weekly check-in, a monthly conversation, a text thread where you share your daily commitments. Whatever works for both of you. Share your audits with them. Tell them what you're working on. Tell them what resistance is showing up. Tell them where you're succeeding and where you're struggling. And let them hold you accountable. Not in a punitive way, but in a loving, expectant way. In a way that says, I know who you're becoming. I see your potential. And I'm not going to let you forget it. And do the same for them. Hold space for their growth. Celebrate their progress. Call them forward when they're stuck. Because growth partnerships are reciprocal. You're not just receiving support, you're giving it. And in giving it, you're reinforcing your own commitment. You're reminding yourself why this work matters. You're becoming the person who expects growth, not just for yourself, but for the people you care about. Finally, environmental design. because your environment is either supporting your growth or sabotaging it. And most people never consider this. They're trying to change while living in spaces that reinforce their old identity. They're trying to build new habits while surrounded by cues that trigger old patterns. And they wonder why it's so hard. So you design your environment intentionally. You structure your physical and digital spaces to make growth the path of least resistance. You remove friction from the actions you want to take, and add friction to the actions you want to avoid. If you want to read more, put books on your nightstand. Not on a shelf across the room. Right there, where you'll see them when you wake up and when you go to sleep. If you want to move your body, lay out your workout clothes the night before. Make it easier to exercise than to skip. If you want to create, set up a dedicated space with your tools ready. Don't make yourself dig through closets to find what you need. Make creation accessible, and remove the cues that trigger old patterns. If you want to, stop scrolling first thing in the morning. Don't keep your phone by your bed. Charge it across the room, in another room. Make it harder to reach for it automatically. If you want to stop snacking mindlessly, don't keep trigger foods in your house. If you want to stop watching hours of television, remove the streaming apps from your devices. Add steps between you and the behavior you're trying to break. Your digital environment matters too. Unfollow accounts that make you feel small, that trigger comparison, that reinforce old stories. Follow people who inspire your growth, who model the life you're building, who remind you what's possible. Curate your feeds intentionally, because what you consume shapes what you believe, and what you believe shapes who you become. These tools, weekly reflection, working with resistance, identity mantras, growth partnerships, environmental design, they're not required, but they're powerful. They take the foundation you've built with the daily practice, and they amplify it. They make the work easier, more sustainable, more effective. You don't need to implement all of them at once. Start with one. Maybe it's weekly reflection. Maybe it's one identity mantra. Maybe it's reaching out to one person for partnership. Start small. Start where it feels most relevant. And add layers as you're ready. Because this is the work of a lifetime. Not a sprint. Not a phase. A lifestyle. A way of being. And the more tools you have, the more ways you can support your own evolution, the more sustainable this becomes. The more you move from trying to change to living as someone who's always changing. From effortful growth to embodied evolution. You have the core method. Now you have the tools to deepen it, to personalize it, to make it yours. Use them. Experiment. Discover what works for you, and keep becoming. Now we need to talk about sustainability, because daily practices are essential, but they're not enough. Tools and techniques are powerful, but they're not sufficient. If you want growth to last, if you want transformation to become permanent, you need to build a life that grows you. You need to create conditions where evolution isn't something you force, but something that happens naturally, because of how you've designed your existence. This is about moving from tactics to architecture, from willpower to systems, from trying to grow to living in a way that makes growth inevitable. Because the truth is, you can only white-knuckle your way through change for so long. Eventually, you'll get tired. Eventually, the resistance will wear you down. Eventually, you'll revert to old patterns unless your life itself is structured to support your becoming. Let's start with something most people get wrong: rest. You think rest is the opposite of growth. You think recovery is what happens when you're not working. You think taking breaks means you're not committed. But that's backwards. Rest is not the opposite of growth. Rest is the foundation of growth. Recovery is not a pause in your evolution. Recovery is where your evolution actually happens. Think about how muscles grow. You don't build strength in the gym. You break down muscle tissue in the gym. You build strength during recovery. When you rest, when you sleep, when you give your body time to repair and rebuild. The growth happens in the space between efforts, not during the efforts themselves. Your mind works the same way. Your nervous system works the same way. Your entire being works the same way. You can push and strive and force yourself to change, but if you never rest, if you never recover, you'll burn out. You'll deplete yourself. And depleted people don't grow, they just survive. So you build rest into your architecture, not as an afterthought, not as something you do when you have time, but as a non-negotiable foundation. You sleep 8 hours. You take 1 full day off per week where you don't work, don't produce, don't optimize. You build in transition time between activities. You honor your body's signals. When you're tired, you rest. When you're overwhelmed, you pause. When you're depleted, you replenish. And you reframe rest as productive, as essential, as the thing that makes all your other efforts possible. Because a rested person has clarity, has energy, has capacity for growth. An exhausted person just has survival mode. And survival mode doesn't evolve, it just endures. Next, learning structures. You can't grow beyond what you know. You can't become more capable without expanding your knowledge, your skills, your perspectives. And random learning isn't enough. Consuming content isn't enough. You need systematic, structured learning that deliberately pushes your edges and builds your capacity. This means investing in courses, not just free content, not just YouTube videos and blog posts, but actual courses with curriculum, with progression, with accountability. Courses that take you from where you are to where you need to be in a specific domain. Because courses force you to show up consistently. They give you a container. They create momentum. And they ensure you're not just consuming information, but actually integrating it. This means finding mentors. People who have done what you're trying to do. People who can see your blind spots. People who can give you feedback, guidance, direction. Not just inspiration. Not just motivation, but specific, actionable wisdom that comes from experience. You don't need a formal mentorship. You need access to people who are further along the path, through coaching, through masterminds, through communities, through relationships you deliberately cultivate. This means reading strategically, not just whatever catches your attention, but books that systematically expand your understanding of yourself, of human nature, of the domains you're growing into. You create a reading list. You commit to 1 book per month. You take notes. You apply what you learn. You treat reading as education, not entertainment. This means seeking experiences that stretch you, workshops, retreats, conferences, travel, conversations with people outside your usual circles. Anything that takes you out of your familiar patterns and exposes you to new ways of thinking, being, living. Because you can't become someone new by staying in the same environments, having the same conversations, consuming the same information. You need novelty. You need challenge. You need exposure to what you don't know. And you budget for this. Not just time, but money. Because learning isn't free. Growth isn't free. The best courses, the best mentors, the best experiences, they cost something. And if you're serious about your evolution, You allocate resources toward it. You don't just spend what's left over, you prioritize it. You invest in your becoming the same way you invest in your rent, your food, your survival. Because becoming isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Now let's talk about stretch projects. These are different from learning structures. Learning expands what you know. Stretch projects expand what you can do. They're challenges that are slightly beyond your current ability. Not so far beyond that they're impossible, but far enough that they force you to adapt, to grow, to become more capable. Maybe you're a writer who's only written short articles. Your stretch project is writing a book. Maybe you're a professional who's always worked for someone else. Your stretch project is starting a side business. Maybe you're someone who's never spoken publicly. Your stretch project is giving a talk. Maybe you're an introvert who's never led. Your stretch project is managing a team. The key is that it's uncomfortable. It requires you to develop new skills. It puts you in situations where you don't know what you're doing, where you have to figure it out, where you have to become more than you currently are just to complete it, because that's how growth happens. Not in theory, not in reflection, but in application. In doing things you've never done before and becoming someone who can do them. You take on one stretch project at a time, not 5, not 10, 1. Because stretch projects are demanding. They require focus. They require energy. They require you to be in active disruption, which is exhausting. So you choose one. You commit to it. You see it through. And in the process of completing it, you become someone who's capable of more. Someone who's proven to themselves that they can do hard things. Someone who's expanded their identity. And then there are seasons of consolidation. This is something most people miss. They grow, grow, grow without ever pausing to integrate. They take on stretch project after stretch project, consume learning after learning, push edge after edge. And they burn out. They become overwhelmed. They lose themselves in the constant striving. So you build in seasons of consolidation. Periods where you're not reaching for the next level, where you're not taking on new challenges, where you're simply living as the person you've become, practicing the new skills until they're automatic, embodying the new identity until it's natural, letting the growth settle into your bones. This might be 3 months, this might be 6 months, this might be a year. It depends on how much you've grown and how much integration you need. But you honor it. You don't rush it. You don't feel guilty for not constantly expanding. Because consolidation is not stagnation. Consolidation is how expansion becomes permanent. It's how the new version of you becomes the real version of you. It's how growth moves from effort to embodiment. And during consolidation, you're not doing nothing. You're still doing your daily practice. You're still auditing, anchoring, acting. You're still showing up. But you're not adding new things. You're deepening what you've already built. You're making what was awkward feel natural. You're making what was new feel like home. Now let's talk about investments, not just in learning, but in the entire infrastructure of your life. Because if your life is structured around maintenance, around staying where you are, you won't grow. You need to structure your life around becoming, around evolution, around the person you're committed to being. This means financial investments. You allocate money toward growth, toward courses, toward coaching, toward books, toward experiences, toward the tools and resources that support your evolution. You don't just spend on comfort and convenience. You spend on capacity, on expansion, on becoming. This means relational investments. You spend time with people who are growing, who challenge you, who call you higher, and you reduce time with people who keep you small, who reinforce old patterns, who drain your energy without contributing to your evolution. This isn't cruel. This is honest. You have limited time, limited energy, and if you spend it on relationships that don't serve your growth, you won't have enough left for relationships that do. This means investing in your environment. You create a home that supports who you're becoming, not just who you've been. You invest in a workspace that makes creation easier. You invest in health, good food, good movement, good sleep, because your body is the vehicle for your evolution. If the vehicle is broken, you're not going anywhere. This means investing in space, literal space, space in your calendar, space in your commitments, space in your mind. Because growth requires space. It requires time to think, time to process, time to integrate. And if your life is packed, if every hour is scheduled, if you're constantly busy, you won't have space to become someone new. You'll just have time to be who you've always been. All of this: rest, learning structures, stretch projects, seasons of consolidation, strategic investments. This is how you build a life that grows you. This is how you move from forcing growth to facilitating it, from trying to change to living in a way that makes change inevitable. Because here's the truth: sustainable transformation doesn't come from motivation. Motivation fades. Sustainable transformation doesn't come from discipline. Discipline is exhausting. Sustainable transformation comes from design, from building a life where the easiest path, the most natural path, the path of least resistance, is growth. When your environment supports your evolution, you don't have to fight yourself. When your relationships expect your growth, you don't have to convince yourself. When your resources are allocated toward becoming, you don't have to choose between growth and survival. When your life is structured around expansion, you expand. Not because you're forcing it, but because that's what your life is designed to do. This is the work of building foundations, not just daily practices, not just tools and techniques, but a complete architecture, a life that grows you, a life where becoming isn't something you do. It's something that happens naturally, because everything, your rest, your learning, your projects, your investments, your relationships, your environment, is aligned with who you're committed to being. You're not just changing yourself, you're changing your life. And when your life changes, staying the same becomes impossible. Growth becomes inevitable. And that's when transformation becomes permanent. Now let's talk about why this works, not just philosophically, not just anecdotally, but scientifically. Because if you're skeptical, if part of you is wondering whether any of this is real or just wishful thinking, you need to understand the biology. You need to see that you're not just a person trying to change. You're a biological system designed for evolution. And when you understand the mechanisms, when you see how your brain and body actually work, you'll trust the process. You'll trust yourself. You'll know that transformation isn't magic, it's neuroscience. Let's start with the most important concept: neuroplasticity. This is the brain's ability to reorganize itself, to form new neural connections, to literally rewire its structure throughout your entire life. For decades, scientists believed the brain was fixed after childhood, that who you were by age 25 was who you'd be forever, that your personality, your habits, your patterns, they were hardwired, permanent, unchangeable. But that was wrong, completely wrong. The research over the past 30 years has proven something extraordinary. Your brain is plastic, malleable, constantly changing. Every experience you have, every thought you think, every action you take, it physically reshapes your brain. New neural pathways form. Old ones strengthen or weaken. Connections reorganize. Your brain at age 50 is fundamentally different from your brain at age 40. And your brain at age 60 will be different still. Not worse. Not declining. Different. Adapted. Evolved. This means change isn't just possible. Change is your brain's natural state. You are designed to adapt, designed to learn, designed to become. The question isn't whether you can change. The question is, what are you changing into? Because you're changing either way, either consciously, through intentional practice, or unconsciously, through repetition of old patterns, either toward growth or toward stagnation. But you're changing. And here's how it works. Every time you think a thought, a pattern of neurons fires in your brain. When you repeat that thought, those same neurons fire again. And again. And the more they fire together, the stronger their connection becomes. There's a principle in neuroscience. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Repetition creates structure. Consistency builds pathways. What you practice becomes permanent. This is why your old patterns feel so automatic. You've practiced them thousands of times. You've fired those neural pathways so often that they're highways now. Wide, smooth, easy to travel. Your brain defaults to them because they're efficient. They require minimal energy. They're the path of least resistance. But here's the beautiful part. You can build new highways. When you practice a new behavior, when you think a new thought, when you choose a different response, you're firing new neurons. And at first it's hard. It's like carving a path through dense forest. It requires effort. It requires energy. It feels awkward and uncertain and exhausting. But if you keep doing it, if you keep firing those neurons, they start to connect. The path gets clearer, and with enough repetition, it becomes a trail, then a road, then a highway, and eventually, the new pattern becomes as automatic as the old one. Eventually, the new you becomes as natural as the old you. Because you've rewired your brain. This is not metaphor. This is measurable physical change. Brain scans show it. Studies prove it. Neuroplasticity is real, and it's available to you, right now, at whatever age you are, whatever patterns you've lived with, whatever identity you've carried, you can change it. Because your brain is designed to change. Now let's talk about motivation, about why some changes stick and others don't, about why you sometimes feel driven and other times feel stuck. The answer is dopamine. This neurotransmitter is your brain's motivation molecule. It's what makes you want things, what makes you pursue goals, what makes you feel excited about the future. And here's what most people don't understand. Dopamine isn't released when you achieve something. It's released in anticipation of achievement. When you're moving toward a goal, when you're making progress, when you're getting closer. That's when dopamine floods your system. That's when you feel motivated. That's when change feels possible. This is why the daily practice works. Because every time you complete your audit, choose your anchor, execute your action, you're creating a micro-win, a small success, and your brain registers that success. It releases dopamine. It says, "This feels good. This is working. Let's do it again." And the more micro-wins you create, the more dopamine you generate, the more motivated you become. Not because you're trying harder, but because your brain is getting biochemical feedback that growth feels rewarding, that change is worth pursuing, that becoming is desirable. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. A massive effort once doesn't create lasting motivation. It creates a spike, followed by a crash. But small, consistent wins create sustained dopamine release. They build momentum. They make growth feel achievable. They train your brain to associate becoming with reward. Now let's talk about identity. Because everything you've done so far, the daily practice, the tools, the architecture, it's all been building toward this, changing who you believe you are. And identity isn't abstract. Identity is encoded in your brain, in specific neural networks that hold your self-concept, your beliefs about who you are, what you're capable of, what you deserve. And those networks were built the same way all neural networks are built, through repetition. Every time you said, "I'm not good at this," you strengthened the neural pathway that says you're not good at it. Every time you acted like someone who's not capable, you reinforced that identity. Every time you chose the familiar over the possible, you wired yourself to believe the familiar is all you can handle. But the reverse is also true. Every time you say, "I am someone who evolves," you're building a new neural network. Every time you act like someone who's capable, you're strengthening that identity. Every time you choose growth over comfort, you're rewiring your self-concept. And with enough repetition, the new identity becomes the dominant network, the primary pattern, the truth your brain believes. This is why identity mantras work, why acting as if works, why choosing behaviors that align with your next-level self works. Because you're not faking it. You're not pretending. You're literally building the neural infrastructure of your new identity. You're making it real at the biological level. Now let's talk about stress. Because growth requires discomfort. It requires stepping into the unknown. It requires challenging yourself, and that creates stress. But not all stress is bad. In fact, some stress is essential for growth. There are two types of stress. Chronic stress, the constant, unrelenting pressure that comes from being overwhelmed, under-resourced, or in survival mode. This type of stress inhibits growth. It keeps your brain in threat detection mode. It floods your system with cortisol. It shuts down creativity, learning, and adaptation. Chronic stress makes you rigid, defensive, stuck. But then there's eustress, controlled discomfort, the stress that comes from taking on a challenge slightly beyond your current capacity, from learning something new, from stepping into a stretch project. This type of stress stimulates growth. It signals to your brain, we need to adapt. We need to become more capable. We need to evolve. Eustress releases growth hormones. It activates learning centers in your brain. It creates the conditions for neuroplasticity. It's the discomfort that makes you stronger, smarter, more resilient. It's the discomfort you need. The key is distinguishing between the two. Chronic stress feels overwhelming, out of control, like you're drowning. Eustress feels challenging, manageable, like you're stretching, and the daily practice creates eustress. It's uncomfortable enough to stimulate growth, but contained enough that you're not overwhelmed. It's the sweet spot where evolution happens. Now let's talk about habit formation, because everything we've discussed, the daily practice, the weekly reflection, the identity mantras, they need to become habits, and habits are how your brain automates behavior, how it takes something that requires conscious effort and makes it unconscious, automatic, effortless. Research shows that habits form through a loop: cue, routine, reward. The cue triggers the behavior. The routine is the behavior itself. The reward is what your brain gets from completing it. And when this loop repeats enough times, it becomes automatic. It becomes a habit. This is why the daily practice is structured the way it is. The cue is waking up. The routine is audit anchor act. The reward is the sense of alignment, the dopamine hit from the micro-win, the reinforcement of your new identity. And when you repeat this loop every day, it becomes a habit. Eventually, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to force it. You just do it. Because it's who you are. And here's what the research shows about habit formation. Consistency matters more than intensity. A small action done daily is more powerful than a massive action done occasionally. Because the brain needs repetition to build automaticity. It needs the loop to repeat. It needs to fire those neurons over and over until they wire together permanently. This is why the anchor is small, why it's before noon, why it's daily. Because we're not trying to create massive change through heroic effort. We're trying to create massive change through consistent repetition, through showing up, through building the neural pathways that make growth automatic. Finally, let's talk about the mind-body connection. Because your brain doesn't exist in isolation, it's part of a system, and that system includes your body. Your physical state directly impacts your psychological capacity, your ability to think clearly, to regulate emotions, to learn, to grow. Sleep is foundational. When you sleep, your brain consolidates memories, processes emotions, clears metabolic waste, and strengthens the neural connections you formed during the day. Without adequate sleep, neuroplasticity is compromised. Learning is impaired. Emotional regulation suffers. You can't grow effectively when you're sleep-deprived. You're just surviving. Movement matters. Exercise increases blood flow to your brain. It releases BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which promotes the growth of new neurons. It improves mood through endorphin release. It reduces anxiety through stress hormone regulation. Movement doesn't just make your body stronger, it makes your brain more capable of growth. Nutrition impacts everything. Your brain needs fuel. It needs the right nutrients, omega-3s for neural structure, B vitamins for neurotransmitter production, antioxidants to protect against cellular damage. When you eat well, you think clearly. You regulate emotions effectively. You have energy for growth. When you eat poorly, your brain is operating at a deficit. This is why rest was emphasized in the foundations, why sleep, movement, and nutrition aren't separate from growth. They're the substrate of growth. They're what make neuroplasticity possible. They're what give you the biological capacity to change. You are not just a mind trying to evolve. You are a biological system, and that system is designed for adaptation, for learning, for change. Your brain rewires itself constantly. Your dopamine system rewards progress. Your neural networks encode new identities. Your stress response stimulates growth when properly managed. Your habits automate behaviors through repetition. Your body supports your mind when you care for it properly. This isn't faith. This isn't hope. This is science. Measurable, provable, real. You can change because you are designed to change. And when you work with your biology instead of against it, transformation isn't just possible. It's inevitable. Understanding the science is one thing. Living it when life falls apart is another. Because it will fall apart. Not maybe. Not if you're unlucky. It will. Life will throw you challenges that make growth feel impossible. That make survival feel like enough. That make you wonder if any of this matters when you're just trying to make it through the day. This is where most people abandon the practice. When things get hard, when chaos arrives, when pressure mounts, They tell themselves, "I'll get back to it when things calm down, when I have more bandwidth, when life is easier." But life doesn't get easier. Life gets different. And if you only grow when conditions are perfect, you'll never grow. Because conditions are never perfect, so you need to know how to maintain the practice under pressure. How to grow through the storm, not just after it. How to use difficulty as fuel for evolution instead of an excuse for regression. Because the truth is, pressure doesn't stop growth. Pressure reveals whether your growth is real, whether it's integrated, whether it's who you are or just something you are trying to be. Let's start with grief, because loss is coming, if it hasn't already. Someone you love will die. A relationship will end. A dream will collapse. A future you imagined will become impossible. And grief will break you open in ways nothing else can. It will shatter your illusions. It will strip away your pretenses. It will leave you raw and exposed and completely undone. And in that brokenness, you have a choice. You can let grief close you down, make you smaller, make you afraid to love, to hope, to want anything, because wanting means risking loss. Or you can let grief crack you open, make you deeper, make you more human, more compassionate, more alive, because you've touched the reality of impermanence, and it's changed you. Grief is not the opposite of growth. Grief is a portal to a deeper version of yourself, a version that knows life is fragile, that knows love is precious, that knows every moment matters, because nothing lasts. And when you move through grief with intention, when you don't numb it or rush it or pretend it's not there, you emerge transformed. Not better, not fixed, but different, deeper, more real. During grief, the daily practice scales down. You're not reaching for new edges. You're not taking on stretch projects. You're in maintenance mode. And maintenance mode looks like this. You still audit. But the question changes from, who am I becoming today? To, what do I need today? You still anchor. But it's smaller. Maybe it's just getting out of bed. Maybe it's taking a shower. Maybe it's eating one meal. Maybe it's feeling what you feel without running from it. You still act. But the action is gentler, kinder, more about honoring where you are than pushing toward where you think you should be. And that's enough. That's growth, not expansion, but preservation, holding on to yourself while everything else falls apart. Not abandoning the practice, but adapting it. Because growth during grief isn't about becoming more. It's about not becoming less. It's about meeting yourself in your pain with the same commitment you brought to your becoming. And that commitment, that showing up even when you're broken, that's profound growth. That's integration at the deepest level. Now let's talk about failure. Because you're going to fail. You're going to try something, and it won't work. You're going to take a risk and fall flat. You're going to step into a new version of yourself and embarrass yourself. And when that happens, your brain will want to make it mean something about who you are. It will want to say, "See, I told you. You're not capable. You're not ready. You should have stayed where you were." But failure is not identity. Failure is data. It's feedback. It's information about what didn't work, so you can try something different. Every failure is proof that you tried, that you stepped outside your comfort zone, that you chose growth over safety, and that alone is success. That alone is transformation. So when you fail, you audit it. You ask, what did I learn? What would I do differently? What assumption was wrong? What skill do I need to develop? What support do I need? You extract the lesson without absorbing the shame. You take the data without taking on the identity of someone who can't succeed. And then you anchor again. You choose one small action that moves you forward. Not a massive comeback. Not a desperate attempt to prove you're okay. Just one action that says, I'm still here. I'm still growing. I'm still committed. Maybe it's reaching out to someone for support. Maybe it's adjusting your approach. Maybe it's trying again, but smaller. Maybe it's acknowledging that this particular path isn't yours and exploring a different one. The key is that you don't stop. You don't let failure become evidence that growth isn't possible for you. You let failure be part of the process, part of the journey, part of how becoming actually works, because no one evolves without failing. No one transforms without stumbling. No one becomes more without trying things that don't work. Failure isn't the opposite of growth. Failure is the price of admission. Now let's talk about high-pressure periods, launching a business, navigating a divorce, caring for a sick parent, moving to a new city, going through a health crisis. These are the times when your bandwidth is completely consumed, when you're operating at capacity, when every ounce of energy is spoken for and there's nothing left over for growth. And this is where most people drop the practice entirely. They tell themselves, I can't handle this and personal growth. I have to choose. And they choose survival. They abandon the daily practice. They stop auditing. They stop anchoring. They stop acting. And they tell themselves they'll come back to it later. But later never comes. And by the time the pressure eases, they've lost momentum. They've lost the habit. They've lost the identity of someone who grows. And they have to start over. So you don't abandon the practice. You scale it. Dramatically. You move into maintenance mode. And maintenance mode during high pressure looks like this. One question, one commitment, one action. That's it. Not the full audit. Not the elaborate anchor. Not the ambitious action. Just the minimum viable practice that keeps the identity alive. Maybe your question is, what's one thing I can control today? Maybe your commitment is, I will take 3 deep breaths before responding to stress. Maybe your action is, I will move my body for 5 minutes. It's not about growth. It's about not losing ground. It's about keeping your hand on the wheel even when you can't accelerate. It's about maintaining your identity as someone who shows up for themselves even when showing up looks different than it used to. And here's what's powerful about this. When you maintain the practice through pressure, even in its smallest form, you prove something to yourself. You prove that your growth isn't conditional, that your commitment doesn't depend on perfect circumstances, that you're someone who keeps going even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And that proof, that evidence, it becomes part of your identity. It becomes who you are. Maintenance mode is not failure. Maintenance mode is wisdom. It's recognizing that there are seasons for expansion and seasons for preservation. And during the seasons of preservation, you're not stagnating. You're holding the line. You're keeping what you've built. You're protecting the ground you've gained. And that's valuable. That's necessary. That's part of sustainable growth. Now let's talk about grace. Because you're going to fall off the path. You're going to skip days. You're going to forget. You're going to revert to old patterns. You're going to look up one day and realize you haven't done your practice in a week, a month, longer. And when that happens, shame will show up. It will tell you that you've failed, that you're not committed, that you're not the person you thought you were becoming. But shame doesn't motivate growth. Shame motivates hiding. It makes you avoid the thing you're ashamed of. It makes you less likely to recommit, not more. So you don't do shame, you do grace. You treat yourself the way you'd treat someone you love who's struggling, with kindness, with understanding, with compassion. You acknowledge, I fell off, I got overwhelmed, I lost momentum. And that's human, that's normal, that's part of the process. And then you recommit. Not with grand declarations, not with promises you can't keep, but with one simple action. Today I'll audit. Today I'll anchor. Today I'll act. Not yesterday, not tomorrow. Today. And that's enough. That's how you come back, not by berating yourself into compliance, but by gently, persistently, compassionately showing up again, and again, and again. Because growth isn't about perfection. Growth is about direction. As long as you keep coming back, as long as you keep choosing forward, you're growing. Even if it's messy, even if it's inconsistent, even if it's slower than you'd like. Grace is the practice of loving yourself through the process, of not making your worth contingent on your consistency, of recognizing that you're human and humans are imperfect, and imperfection doesn't disqualify you from transformation. It makes you eligible for it, because perfect people don't need to grow. Imperfect people do, and you're imperfect. And that's exactly why this practice exists. Here's what you need to understand. Reinvention is not linear. It's not a straight line from stuck to transformed. It's a spiral. You grow, you plateau, you regress, you grow again. Sometimes you move forward quickly. Sometimes you move sideways. Sometimes you move backward. But as long as you keep engaging with the practice, as long as you keep showing up, even when you fall off, even when you fail, even when you feel like you're not making progress, you are. The spiral is still moving. The direction is still up. The becoming is still happening. And the pressure, the grief, the failure, the falling off, these aren't obstacles to growth. They're part of growth. They're tests, opportunities, invitations to prove that your transformation is real, that it's not conditional on perfect circumstances, that it's who you are, not just what you do when things are easy. So when life gets hard, and it will, you remember this. Growth through the storm is possible. Not easy, not comfortable, but possible. You scale the practice. You move into maintenance mode. You extend grace when you stumble. You treat failure as data. You let grief crack you open. You hold the line during pressure. And you keep showing up, imperfectly, inconsistently, but persistently. Because that's what sustainable transformation looks like. Not perfect execution, but relentless commitment. Not flawless consistency, but graceful return. Not avoiding difficulty, but growing through it. That's how you become someone who doesn't just change once, but who keeps changing. Who doesn't just grow when it's convenient, but who grows because it's who they are. That's embodied evolution. That's the goal. And you're building it, one storm at a time. So here you are, at the end of this journey. Except it's not really the end, is it? Because you're different now. Not because you've arrived, not because you've achieved some final form, but because you've understood something fundamental. You are no longer trying to change. You are changed. You are someone who changes. And that distinction, that shift from trying to being, that's everything. Think about who you were when we started. The person carrying the weight of the unlived life. The person stuck in patterns they couldn't break. The person who knew they were capable of more, but didn't know how to access it. The person who woke up to the same thoughts, the same fears, the same ceiling. That person is still you. But they're not all of you anymore. They're a version you've outgrown, a chapter you've closed, a skin you've shed, because now you wake up differently. Not to dread, but to curiosity. Not to the suffocating feeling of another day of the same, but to the question, who am I becoming today? You open your eyes, and instead of immediately reaching for your phone, for distraction, for anything to numb the discomfort of being alive, you pause, you sit with yourself, you audit, you ask what's no longer serving you, you choose what represents your next level, and you act on it. Before noon, before the day pulls you back, before the old patterns reassert themselves. And that's not effort anymore. It's not something you force yourself to do. It's who you are. It's your rhythm, your ritual, your way of being. The daily practice isn't a task on your to-do list. It's the foundation of your identity. It's how you vote for yourself, how you honor the person you're becoming, how you live as someone who takes their growth seriously. You move through the world differently now. Challenges don't feel like threats anymore. They feel like invitations, invitations to become more capable, more resilient, more alive. When something difficult shows up, your first thought isn't, why is this happening to me? It's, what is this asking me to become? What capacity is this calling forth? What version of myself is waiting on the other side of this difficulty? You trust yourself now, not because you're perfect, not because you never fail, but because you've proven to yourself, over and over, that you can adapt, that you can learn, that you can evolve. You've watched yourself grow through grief. You've watched yourself rise after failure. You've watched yourself maintain your practice under pressure. And those experiences, those moments where you could have given up but didn't, they've built a deep, unshakable trust in your capacity to handle whatever comes. You're no longer afraid of change. You're no longer clinging to who you've been, because you're afraid of losing yourself. You understand now that losing old versions of yourself is how you find new ones, that outgrowing who you were is not betrayal, it's evolution, that you're not abandoning yourself when you change. You're honoring yourself, honoring your potential, honoring the person you're meant to become. And when you look back at the journey, at the path you've walked from stagnation to here, you see it clearly. It wasn't one big moment. It wasn't a dramatic transformation that happened overnight. It was small daily choices that accumulated, days when you audited and didn't like what you saw, but you looked anyway. Days when you chose an anchor and followed through even though you didn't feel like it. Days when you acted before noon, when every part of you wanted to wait until tomorrow. Those days, those choices, those small actions, they built this. They built you, the person you are now, the person who wakes with curiosity, the person who sees challenges as invitations, the person who trusts their capacity to grow. That person didn't appear. That person was constructed, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one version at a time, and now you know who you are. Not in theory, not as aspiration, but as lived reality. You are someone who grows, every day, on purpose. That's not something you're trying to be. That's something you are. It's encoded in your neural pathways. It's embedded in your identity. It's proven by your actions. You've become the evidence of your own transformation. So what comes next? Not a destination. Because you understand now that there is no destination. There's no final version of yourself. No point where you arrive and stop growing. That would be death. And you're here to live. You're here to keep becoming, to keep evolving, to keep reaching toward the horizon that keeps expanding. What comes next is more of this. More growth, more evolution, more becoming. But now you know how to do it. You have the practice. You have the tools. You have the architecture. You have the understanding. You have the identity. You're not starting from scratch anymore. You're building from a foundation. And every day that foundation gets stronger. Every day you add another layer. Every day you become more of who you're meant to be. And here's something you might not have considered. Your growth isn't just about you. It never was. Every time you choose to evolve, you give someone else permission to evolve. Every time you step into a new version of yourself, you show someone else that it's possible. Every time you choose growth over comfort, you make that choice more available, more acceptable, more normal for everyone around you. Your partner sees you changing and thinks, maybe I can change too. Your children watch you growing and learn that adults don't stop becoming. That life is not about staying the same, but about continuously evolving. Your friends witness your transformation and feel called to examine their own patterns, their own stagnation, their own unlived potential. Your colleagues notice something different about you, a confidence, a clarity, a presence, and they wonder, what do they know that I don't? Your courage becomes contagious. Not because you're preaching, not because you're telling people they should change, but because you're living proof that change is possible, that growth is available, that becoming is a choice everyone can make. And that living proof, that embodied example, it's more powerful than any words. It's more convincing than any argument. It's undeniable evidence that transformation is real. This is the ripple effect. This is how personal growth becomes collective evolution. This is how your commitment to your own becoming creates a legacy that extends far beyond yourself. You're not just changing your life, you're changing the lives of everyone who witnesses your change, everyone who's inspired by your courage, everyone who's given permission by your example. And maybe that sounds grand. Maybe that sounds like too much pressure. But it's not, because you're not responsible for anyone else's growth. You're only responsible for your own. But your own growth, lived authentically and consistently, naturally inspires others. It naturally calls them forward. It naturally makes evolution feel more possible. And that's the gift. That's the contribution. That's the legacy. So as we close this journey, as you step into whatever comes next, remember this. Reinvention is not a project with an end date. It's not something you do once, and then you're done. It's the work of a lifetime. It's the privilege of being alive. It's the gift you give yourself and the world every single day for as long as you're breathing. Some days will be easy. Some days the growth will flow. Some days you'll wake up and the audit will be clear. The anchor will be obvious. The action will be effortless. Those days are gifts. Enjoy them. Celebrate them. Let them fuel you. Other days will be hard. Some days you'll wake up and forget to audit. Some days the anchor will feel impossible. Some days you'll skip the action and feel the shame creeping in. Those days are also gifts. They're opportunities to practice grace, to recommit without judgment, to prove that your growth isn't contingent on perfection, that you're someone who keeps showing up, even when you fall off, especially when you fall off. And through all of it, the easy days and the hard days, the expansion and the consolidation, the breakthroughs and the plateaus, you keep becoming. You keep evolving. You keep choosing growth. Not because you have to, not because you're broken and need fixing, but because this is who you are now. This is your identity. This is your way of being in the world. You are not here to stay the same. You never were. From the moment you were born, you were designed for change, for adaptation, for evolution, for becoming. And now you're living in alignment with that design. Now you're honoring what you were always meant to do. Now you're becoming what you were always meant to become. And the person you are today, they're not the final version. They're not the destination. They're another iteration, another expression, another stage in your ongoing evolution. And that's beautiful. That's profound. That's exactly how it should be. Because you're not trying to become someone specific. You're not trying to reach some predetermined end point. You're simply committed to the process, to the daily practice, to the ongoing work of becoming more aligned, more authentic, more alive. To the sacred privilege of growing every single day on purpose. You started this journey carrying the weight of an unlived life. And now you're living it. Not perfectly, not completely, but truly, courageously, intentionally. You're showing up for yourself. You're honoring your capacity. You're voting for your evolution with every choice you make. And today, right now, in this moment, you did it again. You chose to listen, to learn, to engage with your growth, to take this journey, to examine your patterns, to understand your resistance, to learn the practice, to integrate the tools, to build the foundation, to trust the science, to prepare for the storms, to become someone new. That choice, that commitment, that willingness, it matters. It's proof, it's evidence, it's validation that you're serious, that you're not just thinking about growth, you're living it. And every time you make that choice, every time you show up, every time you vote for your becoming, you're reinforcing the truth of who you are. You are someone who grows every day on purpose. You are someone who evolves, not because you have to, but because you choose to. You are someone who takes their becoming seriously, who prioritizes their growth, who makes their evolution a daily practice, a sacred commitment, a way of life. You are not here to stay the same. You are here to become. And today, you did. Tomorrow, you will again. And the day after that. And the day after that. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but persistently, consistently, courageously. Because that's who you are now. That's who you've become. And that's who you'll keep becoming, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one version at a time, for the rest of your life. Welcome to the ongoing work of becoming. Welcome to the practice of daily reinvention. Welcome to the life you were always meant to live. You've arrived, and you're just beginning. Both are true. Both will always be true. And that's the beauty of it. You are not here to stay the same.